Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our improving talk for August 27th. Before we start, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that'll make the session much more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present my friend, Blake McMillan, who's a full-time trainer and consultant at Improving. Today, Blake will be sharing a lunch and learn titled Kanban Uncomplicated, Definition of Workflow. The floor is all yours, Blake.
All right, thanks, Shervin. All right, so Kanban Uncomplicated. You know, when we were coming up with this workshop, one of the things that I was thinking about on this is a lot of times we think that we're doing Kanban, and so we're like, yeah, I just put some tape up on a board, and yeah, I'm doing Kanban. There it is. See it? Tape making columns. So that was kind of the thought behind this. And before you start like thinking, man, Blake's kind of tearing me down about this tape on whiteboard thing, don't worry, I'll show you. We've all done it. All right, so first let me tell you a little bit about Improving. So what you should see there is these are the services that we provide. So I'm in the training and coaching department. Those are actually two different places. I actually started as a coach with Improving back in 2019. Joined their training team full-time January 2020, just in time for the world to go nuts. We also do application development. We have consulting services and recruiting services as well. Love my recruiters. One of the things I love the most about Improving is the people I get to work with. People like my friend Shervin. We have a passionate bunch of people who love helping people learn and grow. And that's kind of why we do these Improving talks, is that we want to help people learn. And this is an example of us doing that. So let me show you a little bit about me. Don't worry, I'm not going to read all that stuff. I am a professional Kanban trainer through prokanban.org, and I'm a professional Scrum trainer through scrum.org. You can see some of the companies that I've supported over the years. I have a website called solascrum.com. And if you want to connect with me, please do. I would love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And when you click on that, hey, connect with Blake, say, hey, I met you at the Lunch and Learn, or met you at the Improving Talks, and that's how I'll make a memory hook. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's where you found me. That'd be awesome. And that's it about me. So let's talk about what our source is for this this talk we're going to do. Our source is the Kanban Guide. The Kanban Guide was created, kind of coalesced in 2020, and I believe, Shervin, you can share the link so that it's nice and clicky for people, so they can just click on it. You can go check out the Kanban Guide, no cost. You can just go check it out and read the content that's in there, and you'll see as we go through this that this is based. This talk is based on the Kanban Guide. One of the things I really like about the Kanban Guide is it is minimally prescriptive, meaning that you get just what you need and really nothing more, just what the absolutely essential elements are, with the expectation that you'll get those essential elements and then you'll build upon it. There's an organization that is actually aligned with this thought. It's prokanban.org. I joined prokanban.org as one of their trainers this year. Prokanban.org is people who have this type of mindset of how are we going to help people implement and improve the state of their Kanban and really deliver value, because that's what this is all about. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. So with prokanban.org, we offer a applying professional Kanban course. And in fact, at Improving, we are going to be teaching that course on September 14th and 15th. I'll be teaching that class. I'd love if you'd join me. So if you like what you hear today, consider doing it. If you hate what you hear today, definitely don't do it. Do not join that class, because you're going to get a lot more of this stuff. All right. If you go through the Applying Professional Kanban course, the certification that you are going after and that you can take an assessment and hope to get is the PK1, which is the Professional Kanban Level 1. So The question is, why should we use Kanban? Like, what's in it? Like, why would we even want to do this? First off is optimize the flow of value. Now I'm gonna take a little time to talk about that one specifically, but let me go to these next ones here. Managing work with a visual pull-based system. Last week, I taught a class and someone was asking me something about Agile, and they mentioned sustainable pace, right? That's one of the things in the world of Agile they talk about as a sustainable pace. And they had noticed that during the class I had not talked about that, and they were like, hey, we're going to talk about this at all. And when we started to talk about how with Kanban we create a visual pull-based system, like this is how that happens, is we don't get work pushed at us, which is going to cause us to stress out, and it's going to cause us to have this feeling of like, how am I going to even survive this day? But instead, we're pulling work based on our capacity. This is huge. This is a big change, and this is one of the ways that will ensure quality. We also want to use Kanban because of continuous improvement. One of the practices of Kanban is improving our workflow. So it is built right into the DNA of Kanban that it's expected that we improve. And the other thing I really love about Kanban is that it's very flexible to use in multiple situations. And when I say that, what I mean is there are some frameworks that I love and hold dear to my heart that are really for dealing with complexity, but we don't have to be dealing with complexity when we're using Kanban. We can use Kanban in complex situations, but we can also use Kanban for simple work. In fact, I've used Kanban at the house just to like make sure that we are clear on expectations of what's going to happen over the weekend. And so we've got our little Kanban board that we get to use to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do around the house, right? So that's the simplest that I could think of. And so I didn't include that. Maybe I should include that in one of these slides, is the McMillan family Kanban. But it's flexible for those different situations. Now I want to go back to optimizing the flow of value. When I talk about optimizing the flow of value, there's 3 different dimensions that we look at in the Kanban world. And the first is effective, right? So we want to deliver value in an effective way. And so the way we talk about this is it's delivering what our customers want when they want it. And when do customers want their value? 18 months from now, of course. No, not 18 months from now. They want it now. They want it as close to now as they can get it, right? And so this is one of the things that we're doing, is we're thinking about how can we deliver value sooner. That's where I get it with effectiveness. Now, when we talk about effectiveness, then we've also got to be thinking, well, what if we're really effective sometimes and then sometimes not as much? Well, then that's where we might want to start looking at predictability, right? Because if for some of our customers, they get things immediately, and then for other customers, they get stuff almost never, it doesn't feel predictable. This is when I start thinking about like Fast Pass at amusement parks. Like for the Fast Pass people, this is such an effective line. This is great. I walk right up, I get on the line. For those of us stuck without the Fast Passes, we're watching it go by, we're like, this line's not even moving. What's going on? So predictability means that we want to have an eye on having that kind of predictable delivery of value, that it's not sporadic, it's not all over the place. And then lastly is efficient. And so with efficient, we're thinking about the way that we're using our financial resources, because if we wanted to be maximally effective and predictable, a lot of times we can do that by just spending a ton of money, on people and equipment, and we can just have an overabundance of these things so that we can be effective. One of the ways I think of this is like an emergency room. An emergency room is not an efficient use of equipment. And the reason why is because it's got to be available, it's got to be ready for almost any situation that comes walking through that door. And so when it's not an emergency room situation, because remember, emergency rooms quite costly, quite expensive. If we're trying to actually use the equipment and the resources that we have at our fingertips better, then that's when we have that eye on efficiency. And so with Kanban, we're not looking to maximize the flow of value, but to optimize it. Because if we say maximize, we might just fall into one of these categories. But when we say optimize, we're actually thinking of all 3 of these. So in this talk, we are going to focus in on defining and visualizing our workflow. Now, you remember when I told you, like, hey, don't worry about the whole blue painter's tape thing on the whiteboard. Yeah, it's me. I'm talking about me. I did it, right? So look right there. You can see that's my name at the upper right-hand corner. Like, this was me visualizing the work. And let me just tell you something. If you are not visualizing your work and you do start visualizing your work, there's value in that for sure, without a doubt. Just by having things visual, you will get some value. But here's what I believe. I believe that you can get more value if you don't just visualize your work, but you also define your workflow. And so that's what we're getting ready to talk about right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you read all of this stuff. No, I'm not going to do that to you. That'd be cruel. So too long, didn't read. That slide is like a wall of text. I don't want to do that to you. And instead, what I'd like to do is I'd like for us to kind of walk through some of these different elements by putting it into a context that we're familiar with. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have us focus the context on a sandwich shop. And I'll tell you something funny. So as I was designing this talk, I went out to the internet to see, like, hey, where can I find some common common use images of a sandwich shop that's going to serve me for this. And I ended up getting frustrated because I could find some, I could find some pictures of sandwiches. I could find some pictures of sandwich shops, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. So I went down to my local sandwich shop and just said, hey, can I take some pictures? I'm going to be doing a talk here in the next couple of weeks. And so I was grateful that they actually allowed me to take some photographs that we're going to use for our talk together. So let's get started. Our first one that we're going to talk about is defining individual units of value. So you see right there on that first bullet point, I say, don't skip this step. The reason I put that is because so many times I see this. I see people skipping this step because what they start thinking of is, hey, we'll use Kanban to manage our tasks. And when I think about managing tasks, I don't always associate a task being something valuable. But one of the things that we want is we want for the items that are flowing through our system, for each of those items to have some type of value. We want it to be valuable to our stakeholder or to our customer. And so when we do that, what it allows us to do is it allows us to start thinking about, as we are delivering this value, is it effective? Are we getting it to our customer when they want it? Is it predictable within a certain, within certain tolerances? Is this something that feels like people could depend on it? And then is it efficient? Are we using our resources in a way that is sensible and it's an efficient use of resources? This is why we want to define our units of value. And so for this example, one way we could define our units of value could be sandwiches, because this is a sandwich shop. Now we could also define our units of value as orders, right? Because whenever I go in, maybe we're going to get 2 sandwiches or 3 sandwiches, but it's going to be up to you to define how are you going to make your units of value. But what we wouldn't want to do is define our units of value as tomatoes, pickles, onions, because that probably is not the business that we're in, is just providing tomatoes, pickles, and onions, right? So we want to be thinking of it in terms of something that the customer wants and they want to get. So let's go with sandwiches on this one. Next up, we want to define our start and finish points in the workflow. This is one of those ones where, like, I love that Kanban doesn't tell you this is what you have to do every time, because it would automatically be wrong, because this is going to depend on your context. So in this setting, one of the things I thought of is it depends on what we're trying to measure. It depends on what it is that our focus is and what we want to improve. So if we were to think of the customer experience, we might say that the customer experience starts as soon as they walk in the door. We might also say that the customer experience starts as soon as they get on their phones and they send in a mobile order. That could be the start of it. We could also say that the start of this workflow is when we get asked the question, what can we get started for you today? Because that's what happens, right? I stand in line and then I get to a certain point where I'm looking at that person right across the counter and they say, what can we get started for you today? And so let's say that that's the start of our process. And then we have to come up with our finish point. Now, the finish point, that was not very, I don't think that was too arguable, like, especially in this context. It's going to be when we say, thanks for coming in today, or when they, when the person behind the counter says that, they're going to say that when I have paid for my sandwich and I have left with my sandwich. Now, again, if we were changing the context, right, and we were tracking those mobile orders, then the finish point might be once the order is actually delivered by the driver. So this is where we also have to think about that we may have more than one start and finish point in a given workflow. And that's totally legal, because what we're going to do is we're going to look at those different start and finish points so that we can start to have an understanding of how long things take to get through our flow. That how long things take to get through our flow, that's cycle time. So as soon as we start it, then the timer starts. And then when we say we're finished, that's when we say click on our stopwatch. All right, the timer has stopped, right? And so if we were to look at this, we would say our cycle time in this context, the one that we're going to use to discuss this, is what can I get started for you today? And now I tell them a number 13 made Mike's way, extra vinegar and hold the salt. Like, that's it. And then how we know we're done is because I have swiped my credit card and I walked out of there and I'm getting ready to make some people happy at the house. All right, and then whatever that time is between me leaving after the paying and everything and me ordering, that's going to be our cycle time. So what's in between? What's in between is our work in progress states. So this is also one of those things where sometimes people say, so yeah, we're getting ready to set up this this new Kanban system. How many work in progress states do you think we should have? And I have to give the famous answer, well, it depends. And that's because it's going to depend on your context. It's going to depend on what you're trying to track, what you're trying to improve, what you're trying to optimize. So let's look at this. If we were to have too few different work in progress states, it might look like this. Take the order, make the sandwich, complete payment. Or that might be good. That actually might be all we need. If that's all we really care about, like, hey, this could be all the granularity that we want. But if we started to see like, hey, yeah, it seems like our predictability is kind of off, and like there's no way for me to really isolate any bottlenecks with our work in progress states in their current form, maybe we need more data. What we need is we need more information. So let's have more work in progress states. So now we've got take order and complete payment, of course, but now we've broken out that make sandwich into sliced bread, slice of grilled meat, prep bread, add veggies, add oil, vinegar, and spices, cut the sandwich, bag the sandwich. Okay, so what happens? What happens here is now I bet you we will spend as much time updating our little card, our Kanban card. We would update that more than we would actually be working. And so this is a simple example, but I want you to take this back to your work. If your team members, if you're spending as much time updating your system as you are doing the work, probably a problem. Probably not great. It's not great when your updating your system takes as long as to do the work. Usually that's a bad thing. And so what can we do? We can try to see if we can find that perfect, that Goldilocks temperature. It's not too cold, it's not too hot, it's just right. So now we're gonna take the order. Then we're gonna prep the meat, right? And at this sub shop, they can slice the meat or they can grill the meat on the grill. And then we're going to add toppings, and that's where you get to have a little bit of a voice, a little bit of interactivity as you see them putting those toppings on. Then they're going to get it ready to carry out, and then complete payment. So those will be the steps that we'll look at for our workflow that we're building together. Next up, explicit policies about how work items flow. You see that bullet point again. Don't skip this step. Don't skip this step. If I were to show you my, the board that I had, it didn't have any policies on that board at all. And this is something that is very useful, is to give transparency to the policy so that we're all on the same page about what it is that we're doing, right? Is we understand what does it take for us to move something from this work in progress state to this work in progress state. We may even have some explicit policies of what it means to say, we're going to start working on this. Here's an idea, but let's start working on this. We may have explicit policies around that. And then we should definitely have some explicit policies about when we know something is done. When we say something is done and we give it to our customer, we absolutely want to have some explicit policies around that, because that's one of the ways that we're actually going to reduce our number of defects. And this is something that I think is a real advantage of Kanban, is when we have those explicit policies set up in our work in progress states, what that can allow us to do is it can allow us to find defects sooner, because it's easier to correct those defects when it's earlier in the process than when it's later in the process. Let me give you an example. So imagine that we have our explicit policies, and here they are: meet, complete. So we've gotten everything on there. When we're done, we're like, okay, cool. Yep. This is the number 13. So it's going to have these 5 meets on it. If we just do that check and say, all right, those 5 meets are there, then that's great. But what if we didn't check that, but the customer noticed, and we're all the way in the to go or stay section? So keep in mind, this is after all of the toppings have been applied. We put the sandwich in, we've cut the sandwich, we've wrapped the sandwich, we stuck the sandwich in the bag, and the customer's like, oh, this is supposed to have pepperoni on it, right? And we're like, oh, I think we put pepperoni on there. Pretty sure you didn't. So now everything stops as we take the sandwich out. We open it up. Oh no, I got to get you some pepperoni on here. And the sandwich is kind of looking a mess a little bit. We go back, we slice the pepperoni, and we can make it right, but it'll take longer than if before we put on the toppings, we notice, oh, there's no pepperoni, and that's a crime against humanity. We all know that. The other thing that we're going to do too is we're going to talk about something called WIP limits. We'll talk about how we're going to control WIP in the next section. But as far as explicit policies go, I think it's a great idea when we already know what are some of the exceptions that we're going to say will cause us to violate our WIP limits. And then what are we going to do when our WIP limits get violated? What are we going to do when we have to take some type of emergency work? Because it happens, right? If we can be explicit about this, upfront about this, and not only is the team aware of what to do, but we also make this clear to our customers, to our stakeholders, it can be awesome. All right, that's explicit policies. Don't skip this step. The next one is work in progress. So what we want to do is we want to control the amount of work in progress in our system. And here's the reason is, well, there's a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that when we have more work in progress, what we are going to do is we are going to start to negatively impact our cycle times. And what I mean by that is our cycle times will get longer. And remember, what we said is if we want to be effective, then we're giving our customers what they want when they want it. And in this context, 2 hours for a sandwich, right? No. I don't know any sandwich that's worth 2 hours waiting, right? We want our sandwich in minutes, right? So if we had too much work in progress, what that might look like is just piles of sandwiches because we've got like the world-class slicer, and they're just slicing up stuff so fast. And the person adding the toppings, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting backlogged, and there's so many, and I'm getting confused, and it's just piling up. Now the slicer's like, yeah, I'm like the best slicer in the world. I'm #1 slicer. But what's that worth to a customer? Not much. Because having sliced meat piled up on bread, that's not valuable. What's valuable is that finished sandwich. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to have tons of sandwiches work in progress. One, that's how we can introduce defects. That's how we can introduce confusion. And if we're having a hot sandwich, imagine if your hot sandwich comes straight off the grill and now it's behind 9 cold sandwiches. Then your hot sandwich has turned into a cold sandwich. Gross. So what do we want to do? We want to limit our work in progress. And so here's what we see. We see our work in progress limits. So for prep meat, we're going to say the most we can have at any one time going is 4. Now, I didn't just pull that number out of nowhere. What I did was I looked at their work service and I saw you could have 2 grilled items that are cooking. And so that's meat being prepped. And then also, I've actually ordered 2 sandwiches before, not just for me. Don't judge me. Come on. But I've ordered 2 sandwiches for my family. And so what they did, same one, they started slicing and they did, okay, here's the ham, here's the pepperoni, here's the capicola. And like they built 2 sandwiches at once. So that's kind of what led me to say maybe that prep meat limiting the work in progress for that one is going to be 4. Then we look at add toppings. So with add toppings, it might just be 1. We may just have a work in progress limit of 1 here, because that way the person is focused on this sandwich. That way, if there's no salt, because that's what we have in my house, no salt, because my wife's a high taster. And so she's like, oh yeah, it tastes too salty, put the salt on. So I don't want them to be distracted. I don't want them to be flinging salt all around. Now, if they want to fling some vinegar around, I'm cool with that because that's delicious. But they're going to focus in on just that 1 topping. So we have our work in progress limit here to 1 because this is where there's a lot of variability. So we just have that 1. And then that prep for carryout, there's really only room for them to wrap up 1 sandwich at a time. So that's what we're looking at when we try to define our work in progress limits. This is a way to do it, is we could do it at each station. Now, this is not the only way we could do it. We could also say that we're only going to have 6 sandwiches in progress at any one time. And so what we would do is whenever we say, all right, here's this one that's done, then that allows us to start pulling and saying, all right, so now I'm ready to prep this next one for carryout. And then the person that adds toppings says, I'm ready now to add toppings to this next one that has meat already on it. That's what we mean when we say pull based. So the question is, so Blake, you just told me how we get started with WIP limits with this sandwich idea. I don't think it's too far different when you get back to work, because there's going to be constraints that you will see. And this is another thing too. As much as possible, we want the people who are designing the Kanban system to be the people that use the Kanban system. Because if you're designing the Kanban system for somebody else, every WIP limit's going to seem reasonable to you. But the people who actually are using it, who are living it, that's the people who are going to know. Right? They're going to know, well, there's only so many of these that we can do. Because the kind of license we have, we can only do this many requests at any one time. Okay, cool. So that WIP limit just emerges based on some type of constraint. And that's what we'll find, is we want the people who are designing the system to be the ones who experiment with the WIP limits. Now, you may think, well, what if we don't get the WIP limits right? That's okay. It's normal. It's totally normal. It's okay not to get it right on your first try. And so what you do is you change them, but you want to change them for the right reasons. You don't want to change your WIP limits because someone comes in and says, yeah, I want a whole bunch of sandwiches. Uh-oh, everybody, let's now change our WIP limits up to 8 because someone just ordered 8 sandwiches. Nope, that's not what we do. What we do is we keep our WIP limits. Now, we may still have to make 8 sandwiches, but we're still going to keep those WIP limits because we know that we can't do too many of those things at the same time. And so we don't want to change WIP limits based on demands. What we want to do is change WIP limits based on capacity. We want to change our WIP limits when we start to see that maybe there's some bottlenecks that start to emerge. And WIP limits are good at showing these bottlenecks. And it's good stuff when we see it, because then we can optimize around that and we can make sure that our value is flowing through our system. So I believe we should change our WIP limits when we discover that we see that there's bottlenecks, but this is not something that we just do on the fly all the time. Otherwise, it's like we don't have WIP limits at all. Next up
we got a couple questions about WIP, if I can ask you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of them is one I actually had working in my Kanban teams. Aaron asks, is enforcing start and end dates estimates on WIP items good or bad?
So let me make sure I understand this. It's asking about estimates, or it's asking about the start and end endpoints?
I believe he's asking if you have an item you're bringing in and we estimate it's going to take, whether it's 5 days or a calendar date. Should the team be like saying, hey, we said this is going to be 5 days, we got to stick to this date?
Okay, because that is a little bit different. And that question is something that we're getting ready to talk about a little bit with service level expectations, because with work in progress limits, if we were going to talk about making adjustments to those, then that's one discussion. But I think what I'm hearing from Aaron's question is, hey, when we looked at this item that we know is valuable, because we're not going to skip that step. When we look at this item that's valuable and we took a look at it and said, you know what, I feel like we can get this thing done inside of a week. If we're saying that we need to hold ourselves accountable and we have to make sure that this thing gets done in a week no matter what, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I mean, like, how does that, should that be what drives the WIP? Like, we're not bringing anything in because we have this date rather than the amount of items.
Yeah, I would not say that date affects our WIP limit, because what's going to affect our WIP limit is the number of items that are in our system, right? So the number, it's just a count of items, right? We're going to have 5 items. Maybe we have a WIP limit of 5 over everything. We're only going to have 5 things in progress at once, regardless of what state they're in. That's going to be it. Now, if we have this item that's going to take us 5 days, well, then that's something that we should be focused on. That's something that we should be trying to move forward as much as possible. And we don't want to just like throw it aside. Now, I do want to make sure I answer Aaron's question about what do we do about expectations? And when we look at an item and say, hey, we think that we're going to get this done. And so let me start that explanation by talking about service level expectations, because service level expectations is one of the required elements. And this is also one that I don't see a lot of people necessarily have. They don't have it. They don't display it. Maybe people don't know what it is. But when we understand service level expectations, then I think we can tie it back to what Aaron's question is. So first of all, whenever I say service level expectation, sometimes people think I mean service level agreement. I do not. A service level agreement is this thing that we hope for. Sometimes we sign contracts, we sign contractual agreements that say, I will deliver this at this time all the time, right? Sounds a little bit similar, right? If I said, hey, I'm going to get this done in 5 days, well, that's an agreement. We made this agreement and this is when it's going to have to be done. Service level expectation is a little bit different, because service level expectation is something that is going to emerge from our cycle time data. And what this means is we're going to look at our data. We're going to look at our the work items that flow through our system. And we're going to say, all right, let's look at the cycle time data. And all cycle time is, how long did it take to go from start to finish through our system? That's all cycle time is, right? We're going to look at the cycle time and we're going to say, what is our average cycle time? And we can start to look at our cycle time and say 85% of our items get done within a certain amount of time. 50% of our items may get done within a certain amount of time. And when we use there's a chart called the cycle time scatter plot. We just plot this stuff on the cycle time scatter plot. Then all we have to do is count the items and draw a line and say, all right, here's the 85% or 90%, whatever predictability level we're hoping for. And then this is how we express a service level expectation. Based on our data, 85% of our items are done in 5 minutes. So now let's go back to what Aaron was saying. What Aaron was saying is that when we were looking at an item, and let's say that our Kanban system, what we have set up, let's say that 85% of our stuff gets done within 5 days. And so when we looked at this, we said, yeah, this looks like this is good. This looks like this is something within like our normal workflow. So we bring it in. And then as we start working on it, what we find out is, problems. We didn't really understand this as well as we thought we did. We thought we were just going to make a single change to this data element. However, what we realized was it's not a data element. This is something that is more like a view. And so now we're going to have to go make changes to several data elements. Woo, this is getting more and more complex. And then some of these data elements, I'm not even sure if these are the right data elements. And so here we go. Like now we've discovered some complexity in this thing that we started. It's okay. Now, here's what I say is, should we do our best? Absolutely. But I don't think we should be doing our best to make sure that it hits 5 days. We should be doing our best to make sure that this thing gets done as soon as possible, right? Because that's what it means to be effective, is we want to deliver that value as soon as possible. And so if we find out that, hey, based on this complexity, 5 days, probably not going to happen. That's all right. We get it done as soon as we can. Let's say we get it done in 8 days, right? Took us 3 extra days to do it. So now what's going to happen is we've got a new data point on our cycle time chart that says here's 8 days. Now, if we have a number of those, then what's going to happen is you'll start to see that our SLE will change, because our SLE will be based off of our cycle time data. Now, here's a thing that I want to make sure that we capture here. Although the SLE is derived from our data, the acceptability of our service level expectation, well, that may be in question. So let's bring it back into this context. And let's say that we say 85% of our sandwiches are done in 5 minutes. That seems reasonable, right? Let's say that over time let's say we bring in some new people, and some new people are struggling with some of the processes. They're kind of having a problem with the slicer. And so over time, we start to see that our service level expectation goes up to 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. What do you think happens when sandwiches take 10 minutes to make it through our system? I'll tell you what happens. That's when you start to see that line going to the door, and you see people walk up to the door and then they walk out. We start to lose customers. And then we even have people in line going, and then they leave. So we start to lose revenue because we're not effective. And so even though that service level expectation is derived from data, that service level expectation may be showing us that what we are delivering is unacceptable to our customers. Last thing there is before we have data, all we do is we do our best. And so this is an example where, what do I think would be acceptable? Probably 5 minutes. And so maybe that's what we set our service level expectation to be before we have data. But as soon as we have data, our service level expectation should be based on data. And the reason we want this is for predictability. We want to have a predictable system, because if we went in to the sandwich shop and sometimes we get our sandwich in 2 minutes, yay, and sometimes it's 20 minutes, boo. I'm gonna love and hate the sandwich shop. But if every time it's 4 minutes, give or take a minute, it's good. Sherman, do you feel like I answered Aaron's question about like the whole idea for like I estimated 5? Well, if you estimated 5 and you're wrong, well, you're wrong. Capture that as data, but you don't have to, because that's an unrealistic expectation to say that we have to. Like I said 5 days, so I have to. What do you think?
I think you did, but Aaron, if I didn't explain the question correctly, or if Blake need to give you a little bit more input, please reply in the
Cool.
Q&A session, and we'll take care of you.
Yeah, we'll pick it up at the end. So now what I want to do is, now that we've talked about this context, now let's see what it might look like for us to actually build this workflow. So first off, what are we going to do? We're going to measure pickles and tomatoes, Blake. We're not going to measure pickles and tomatoes. We're going to measure sandwiches, because people don't buy just pickles and tomatoes. People buy sandwiches. So there they are. There's and that's how this sandwich shop does theirs. They call it number, the number 4, the number 11. My favorite, the number 13, delicious. It's the original Italian. Oh, it's glorious. All right, so the number 13. So we see now there's the units of value. Here's these sandwiches that are flowing through our system. All right. Now we're going to define those start and finish points in the workflow. This is what we said, right? Take the order. That's the first thing that we do. That's where we're going to start measuring the effectiveness of our sandwich delivery. Taking the orders. And then we have done. Now you notice we don't put a work in progress limit on done. That's because every business owner is like, don't ever limit done. I want to sell as many sandwiches as I can, right? So we're not going to limit our work in progress on done ever, right? So these are our start points and our finish points. Now what we're going to do is we're going to define our work in progress states. Now we didn't want to have it be too complex, so now we've just got prep meat, add toppings, and our prep and pay. So those are our work in progress states. So now we can see those. Now what's missing? Anything important? Oh, that's right. That thing I said, don't skip this step. Our explicit flow policies. Let's take a look at what they may look like. Confirm the order. Like I'll tell you, like there have been some restaurants that I go to, and they're really good at saying, okay, so just so I got it clear, what you want is a da 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 da, and they repeat my order back to me. I'm like, oh, this is a good idea, because what they're doing is they're seeing if there was a defect in the way that they heard me right here. Because then if I'm like, oh, no, that was a double, not a single, then like, okay, cool, got it. Because that's terrible when it happens at the end. So maybe we confirm the order there. And then with the prep and the meat, we may get some orders where we say, hey, it says prep meat, but they want a vegetarian. That's on our menu. Cool. What that means is we're going to slice those bell peppers, because that's what's in the veggie sandwich. Then add the toppings. They do a great job of this. All right, does this look good? More lettuce. Okay, no problem. And they're like, and tomatoes and pickles. Oh, no pickles. Oh, right, no pickles, no pickles. So we get that customer confirmation as we're going. And then prep and pay. Now, from the business owner standpoint, this is a very important step. They're not making these sandwiches for charity, so they want to make sure they get paid, right? So before we hand that sandwich over, we're going to make sure that they paid for the sandwich, and then they hand it over. And that's what those explicit flow policies are going to look like. Now we add in our work in progress controls. All right, and so there we go. We see them taking the order. We can only talk to one person at a time if we're just tracking the taking the order in a live setting. If we started to add in those Uber Eats orders, well, we could maybe bump that up, and maybe we'd have something for that. Then we have our prepping meat, add toppings. We talked about how these are, but now here we see them on our Kanban board. Then what's left? Our service level expectation. Let's always make sure we put that service level expectation. And here's the thing, make it easy to update, because again, this is not a promise. This is not something that's built on hopes and dreams. This is something that's based on data. And so if we were really cool, what we'd have is we would have this update itself. This would update based on our cycle time data. That would be awesome. Really cool, as if all it was showing what the actuals are. That's what we're looking for with our service level expectation. All right, so this was us talking about defining and visualizing a workflow. This is from this stuff is straight from the Kanban guide. Now, if you want to know more, you can actually go to the Kanban guide, and you can just download the Kanban guide, read it online. You can read about Kanban. If you actually want to know more than that, and you want to actually see it in practice, then I would invite you, join me for the Applying Professional Kanban that's coming up on September 14th and September 15th. We've got one of those classes offered, and I happen to know that we still have our early bird special, which means you get $200 off. So if you want to join me, come in and be fun. We'll do this. You can also get more information going to prokanban.org. And also, of course, I'd want you to come visit improving.com. So now, Shervin, this is when we can get into some questions, because that's a want to know more kind of topic.
We did have a question earlier. It asked about, it was when you were talking about the swim lanes and having whips for individual ones. And I think they asked, is it better to have like one item done and one in work in progress in one swim lane and another in work in progress, or do you simply roll that up into there's two work in progresses? Is there a better practice for Kanban practitioners to follow?
Yeah, so the important thing is limiting our work in progress based on what we're capable of, right? So when we say, is it better to have one? Well, if it's a single person doing the work, maybe, right? Because not many of us can actually do two things at once. So if what we want to do is we want to have a personal Kanban system that's just for us, then that may be something that we do, is we say, yeah, I am going to totally focus and concentrate on one thing at a time. And so when I say I'm going to bring this into my to-do, I'm all in on it and I try to get it done. And then when I'm done, boom, done. Now I can do something new. Bam. Now, if we have more than one person who's working on something, then I would think, it's possible we might have more capacity. Now, we got to be careful, though, because work in progress limits should not be just based on people, should be based on our capacity, should be based on how we want to control the amount of things that are flowing through our system. Does that help?
Like, I just got a clarification. So they meant, so is it better to have two resources, meaning two people working on one item in progress, or should they be working on separate items? I think I know the answer, but like, should they be collaborating? Is it best to collaborate, or should they focus on them individually? That's a common thing you see, I think, with Kanban boards. I know what the Kanban guy would stress. I know what you would stress, but I want to hear what you would say about individuals working versus what the board brings us.
Yeah, it depends. And so if we were working on something complex, something that's never been built before, something that no one has seen, no one has ever done before, then I'm a big fan of that collaborative work style, right? Having more than one mind working on the problem, beautiful. If we're talking about adding toppings to a sandwich, if I had someone reaching across and like they're putting on tomatoes and someone else is reaching across and they're putting on onions and then someone else is reaching across and putting on tomatoes. Wait, is that two tomatoes? Wait, how many tomatoes are going to put on this thing? Then no good, right? It's going to depend on our context. And so really what I would look for is I would look for the members of the Kanban team to use their best judgment. If they think it's better for us to tag team this thing, maybe not just for the throughput, but maybe for the learning, that could be good, right? But if it makes more sense for like, hey, this is just me updating these rows in this thing. I mean, you could help if you want to, but like, I don't know. I mean, you could just watch me enter these rows. I don't know, maybe not so much in that context, but I'd look for the people who are doing the work to make that decision.
Like, I have a question myself. Like, I know this entire Lunch and Learn has been focused on, the definitional workflow, which I think you made the point very clear in the beginning, right? It's not just painter's tape and Post-its that make Kanban, right? And so you take it a step further. I know I personally didn't embrace Kanban because I was ignorant to the formality of it, the actual rules and guidelines. But what are some of the other things that somebody should make themselves aware of, or sign up for a course, whether it's with us or anywhere else, that is essential to Kanban working right? Like, it's not blue tape, it's not Post-it notes. Mm-hmm. It is the definition workflow. But what other areas should somebody be looking into, or knowing that they need to study a little bit more?
Yeah, and so this is where I'll kind of like lean on the other two practices. The other two practices that are specified in the Kanban guide is actively managing the work. Now, to me, actively managing the work, that's its own type of discipline. I've seen like where improvements were made, not because we changed the workflow, but because we had a different kind of focus on the work that was in progress. I've seen how actively managing the work can actually improve our performance. It can actually help us deliver value to our customers better. And then the other practice is improving our workflow. This is where we start to get into the world of metrics. And so the reason that we talk about this definition of workflow and why these elements are necessary is when we have these elements in place, we can start measuring things better. When we can start measuring things better, we can have better targets for improvement, because it can be pretty hard to improve our workflow without data. And when we have those different elements that we've identified in our workflow, these are the required elements. Could we have more? Absolutely. But these are the ones that are required. When we have this, it makes it easier for us to spot, hey, I just saw our cycle times go up. And it's not just based on a gut feel, right? It's not just based on like, I see people walking out, what's going on? No, I'm basing it off of data. And because we're keeping our start and finish times and we've controlled our work in progress and all the other things that we talked about, then I can start to see, okay, this is where our data is trending. We need to do something. So those are two of the practices that are spelled out in the Kanban guide. And so if that's something that people want to learn about, then absolutely, this is what this is all about.
I think that was our last question.
All right. Well, what I would like to say is thank you to everyone who decided to have your lunch together with us. Thank you, Shervin. I always appreciate the time I get to hang out with you and time we get to spend together. Thank you for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, because one of these days, this is going to be on YouTube. And so if you're like, hey, wow, this was 2 years ago. Wow, this is still relevant. Yay. Now, the class isn't relevant. That class is already 2 years in the past, but I bet you we got one coming up. So go check it out. Go to improving.com and see when we got a class coming up, because we'd love to have you come in and learn with us. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for attending today's Improving Talk. And Blake, thank you for sharing Kanban Uncomplicated, definition of a workflow. The recording of the session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the session from Improving's virtual events page. And while you're at our virtual events page, be sure to register for future Improving Talks. We hope you had a wonderful and safe day, everyone. See you next time.